Gibby from iCarly was meant to get a spin-off show. Just like how Jeanette McCurdy and Ariana Grande got their Dan Schneider spin-off show from iCarly and Victorious to Sam and Cat, originally Noah Monk was meant to get a spin-off show about his character Gibby, and the show was of course going to be called Gibby. And this show was very, very strange. You thought Gibby was strange? Trust me, imagine that but times 1000. There's a reason this show only got to shoot its pilot episode and then was never continued for good reasons. And to be honest, I'm surprised Nickelodeon was even considering the pilot script, let alone this entire show altogether, because the concept is just awful. Just like how Sam and Cat looked at Sam's journey after leaving iCarly and leaving school, looking at her working as a new job as a babysitter and having a new roommate, Gibby would have looked at Gibby's life after iCarly, but while still finishing his final year at school and getting a career at a local leisure centre called the Bixby. On the 31st of August 2012, Dan Schneider tweeted, "I'm here editing the very first episode of Gibby," or whatever we end up calling the show. "It's making me laugh hard. At Noah Monk equals genius." It was announced on Twitter that this show was definitely in the works and that we could be potentially getting a Gibby spin-off show. However, the show really does not make you laugh, and if you want to go and check out the show yourself, there are links on the internet for you to go and watch this pilot episode. We're going to go through a few clips here today. It is not very funny and it's quite boring. It was almost doomed from the start simply because the main cast of this show was Gibby plus 4 middle schoolers. Gibby was the only one his age, and with Noah Monk's height and how young they cast these 4 middle schoolers, who are meant to just be stereotypical unpopular kids, it just looks and feels very, very strange, especially if you watch it. Now, don't get me wrong, Schneider Bakery has had characters before who hang out with characters who aren't their age. I mean, Spencer is a perfect example, but the difference with Spencer is that he was a side main character to the main characters, who was a group of 3 kids who were the exact same age, being Carly, Sam, and Freddie. This instance, it's Gibby who is our main character, who is the only person who is his age, and he is surrounding himself along with loads of people who aren't his age and are significantly younger than him. And this is Dan Schneider we're talking about. Of course, it was made even worse by his sexualizing and his unnecessary need of showing people's bodies. Let's take a look at a few examples just from this pilot episode alone. Just looking at this script, the first stage direction is described as chaos. Students are freaking out as the teacher, Mr. Waggett, is bent over his desk, screaming. 2 school nurses are struggling to treat a wound on Mr. Waggett's butt. And the actual clip is not any better. Let's take a look. I mean, it's just everything that you would imagine from a Dan Schneider spin-off show. Like, it's the first scene and we've already got some weird Dan Schneider stuff, but then the ending just tops that. Now, we know Gibby is a bit of a weird character. I mean, that's the entire point of the reason why he was in iCarly in the first place, to be that weird comedic side character. Before he became a main character in iCarly from season 4 onwards, he was just a funny throwaway side character who had one gag, taking off his shirt. And sure, it was funny. Gibby was the only one, and I will say Noah Monk played it hilariously and definitely brought a lot of comedy to this side gag. But as soon as he properly hit puberty and began growing and then became a main character, they decided to stop the trope of Gibby taking off his shirt, as it would have just gotten even more inappropriate, and instead we got his famous catchphrase, "Gibby!" However, this show just takes that part of the character to a whole other very weird level. Here's what the script says. Everyone looks at Gibby. Taken aback by his angry Hulk expression and stance, he whips off his shirt. Following suit, Flip, Marken, and Winston whip off their shirts. Gibby charges Max and Deke like a wild, crazed maniac, yelling, flailing his arms, and looking very dangerous. Flip, Marken, and Winston again follow suit, doing the same thing. The four guys, Gibby in the lead, chase Max and Deke right out of the Bix. The quartet and Gibby share a big five-way hug. And bear in mind, everyone apart from the girl, who might I say is just a very poor attempt at trying to recreate Sam, but for this Gibby spin-off show, has their shirt off at this point, and they're hugging a grown man who also has his shirt off, and it's just very weird and looks really strange and really, really wrong. Let's take a look. Like, can you imagine if like that had been turned into an actual TV show and that was one of the main premises? That probably would have been a running gag throughout the entire show. All of these guys taking off their shirts and just running at random people. It's a bit weird. Like, it's just a bit of a strange shot at the end with like Gibby, who's a grown man, hugging all of these younger kids who also have their shirts off. It's weird. It's very Dan Schneider, and I'm glad that it wasn't made into a spin-off show. And then we also have the fact that this episode was just plain boring. Like, the plot is all over the place. There's a really weird slow motion moment of Gibby trying to catch a chicken nugget, which just feels out of place for Schneider Bakery as a whole. We wouldn't have seen anything like that in iCarly or Victorious at this point. The main concept of the show is Gibby befriending unpopular middle schoolers who are all very much one-dimensional. They don't really have any variety between them, and they're very much character tropes. They are just seen as unpopular kids. There's nothing to distinguish them from each other. And then just the plot of this episode, we randomly go from being at school to then having a random dodgeball training session alongside a robbery that just randomly appears and seems like it should have been in a completely different episode all by itself. And just the longevity of this show looks like it wouldn't have gone anywhere. I mean, I don't really know how many stories you could have told about Gibby with a bunch of middle schoolers in a leisure centre. Apart from teaching them sport, I mean, a new sport every episode maybe, but I couldn't see how this show could have continued. And especially with this cast, they were just not very good, and the concept is just plain bad. And so I do think it was a good idea that Nickelodeon did decide to change their minds and went with Sam and Cat instead, which opened the door for Victorious and iCarly to properly come together and combine. Plus, Sam is just a way more interesting character from iCarly compared to Gibby. Like I say, Gibby was originally created as a comedic one-dimensional side character who had a trait of taking off his shirt. It was only when the gags became more and more popular that they decided to turn Gibby into a fully fledged character and into a main character for season 4 to 6. And that character that they created from this gag is not enough to make this side character into a main character for a spin-off show all about him. The equivalent character in Victorious was St. John, and could you imagine if I said, let's create a spin-off show where St. John is the main character, rather than creating a spin-off show where Kat is the main character? I mean, it's a no-brainer. You would not want a spin-off show with St. John. St. John is the equivalent of Gibby in the Schneider Bakery TV shows. Or to take the same example from Sam and Cat, it would be like taking Goomer and creating a spin-off show all just about him. And even though Sam and Cat did end up having its controversies and did end up only having one season, I don't think it's because of the general concept of putting Sam and Cat as babysitters together and becoming roommates. I think the concept is perfectly fine and makes sense for those characters and was interesting enough that I do think the show worked. It's just a shame that behind the scenes, the actors and the creators of the show, that's where it all fell apart. I don't actually think the characters and the concept of the show itself did fall apart, whereas this show, the characters and the concept do just fall apart right from the get-go. Plus, Gibby did end up making a cameo appearance in Sam and Cat, so he did end up making it into one of the spin-off shows. And Noah Monk has stated that he is glad that the pilot didn't get continued and that this didn't become a big deal, because he said he didn't want to be playing this character on and on during his adult life, which I think is fair enough, and I think it's glad that we never really got this show. But anyway guys, that is the end of this video. I hope you have enjoyed it. If you have, make sure that you smash that like button down below and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Guys, let me know down below in the comments, what do you think about this Gibby spin-off show? Do you think that Nickelodeon should have made this show a reality and should have continued it after this pilot? Or are you glad that they didn't? I'm very glad that they didn't, and I think Sam and Cat is a much better idea than this. But as always, we've been here on Creative Theories. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later.
Something about you feels so different. Yeah, you mess me up inside. It's like you